Hello my precious little dragons, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm going to be talking about the worst books I read in 2020. So take this with a grain of salt. Not all of these are necessarily bad books. Some of them just aren't for me, some of them I had just technical problems with, some things had legitimate problems, like they're problematic in nature, and some things just weren't for me at this moment in time. Like I might come back to them, might not. We'll see. That being said, if these are your favorite books, I'm actually really curious why. Like, I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way, but like, if I happen to mention one of your favorite books or book you really enjoy, I'd love to have a dialogue about it down below in the comments. Please tell me why you love these books, or if you also didn't like them, maybe just like, let's commiserate down in the comments. If I have a book look on it, I will link it up above. If I don't, there's probably a reason for that. So I don't have a ton to list, and none of these were like, I didn't really have any like 1-star reads technically. Partially also just because I don't really, the star system isn't my favorite. I feel like it's kind of one-dimensional, and I think that books are very complicated, so a 1-star read book would just be like, that just feels weird to me. Because my reasons for not liking a book, like there may be legitimately good aspects about a book that are like in your 4 or 5-star range, and then there may be things that are like I absolutely abhorred about a book. So like, what do you rate it? Do you just rate it a 3? Like just the star system as a whole, not my favorite. Anyway, so I kind of have these categorized by why I didn't like them or why they had problems for me specifically. So I'm going to start out with the just not for me category. So these again are not necessarily bad books. In fact, they may actually be good books, but for whatever reason, they just didn't work for me. So the first one I want to mention is Less by Andrew Sean Greer. So this one is about like a failed novelist who's middle-aged, and let's see, I listened to it on audiobook, and I didn't really get to the actual like main portion of the book. Like I DNF'd it. Like it's supposed to have like a lot of like travel and kind of like sort of finding yourself again. It says it's a love story, a satire of the American abroad, a rumination on time and the human heart. I just didn't get into it. Like I said, I never got to the travel part. It didn't really grab me, and there was nothing wrong about it. There was nothing bad. It just didn't grab me. And I was listening to it on an audiobook, and I'm like, you know, there's other stuff I want to read more. There's other stuff that grabs me more books that I want to get to. It just wasn't for me. So again, there's nothing particularly wrong about it. So I would be curious if you have read this book, especially if you've finished this book. I would be really curious to know your thoughts on it, to know if you really enjoyed it. There was something about Arthur Less that just didn't really grab me. The writing style didn't really grab me. Again, nothing about the book grabbed me, and you know, I've come to accept DNFs a little bit more. I used to be one of those people like, I have to finish a book. I have to finish a book. If I start it, I have to finish it. But at this point, I'm more just like unless I specifically want to do a review on it, I'm much more okay with just letting myself DNF a book, with saying this isn't for me either right now or forever, and moving on to something I will enjoy more. I don't feel obligated as much to force myself to finish a book I'm not enjoying. So I quit this one pretty early on. That's about all I have to say about it. The next one is An Elderly Lady Who Is Up to No Good by Helene Tursten. This is a translated work. It's a novella, it's quite short, and I believe it's translated from Swedish. This one just wasn't for me just because it felt weird. Like my mom and I listened to it on audiobook, and it was just, I don't know, something about the style didn't grab me, and I don't know if it's because it was translated or just the way it was narrated, but like it was just weird. And it's basically about this like little old lady who like goes around murdering people that annoy her, and like it sounded like it should be really funny and interesting, but it wasn't. Like it wasn't funny to me, it wasn't grabbing me. Like, and my mom felt pretty much the same way. We were just like, what are we listening to? But we finished the whole thing because it was short. But like I barely remember anything about it other than like the vague recollection that was really weird. You know? So it wasn't for me. Again, I don't know if it's because it was translated, and maybe I would love it if I read Swedish and like it was in the original language. It might have been an issue about translation, or it may just be that it wasn't for me. But either way, that one's up there. The next one is The Circular Staircase by Mary Roberts Rinehart. This was another DNF. So this one was another one I started to listen to on audiobook, and it just wasn't grabbing me. Something about the mystery wasn't grabbing me, and like this was kind of like, it's an older book, so there was some problematic kind of like racist aspects to it, which is unfortunately very common in books from that era. I didn't even really get to the mystery part so much. It just didn't grab me. That's about all I have to say. I feel bad that a lot of these are very general, but a lot of these I read earlier in the year. Okay, the next section only has one book, sorry. The next section is writing problems. So these were things I just think had like some technical problems, and so they really lowered my enjoyment of the book. So this one is Again But Better by Christie and Riccio, and I feel bad about this one because it was her debut novel, so like that gets some grace from me. It's very hard to write a book, it's hard to get published, so I mean, again, I wanted to applaud her for that, but I think that there were some things that very much felt first-time author to me, and specifically had to do with writing, just writing style in general and pacing specifically. Especially there's two parts to this book. The first part I felt dragged on way too long. It just focused on way too many details, and it didn't work for me. I think there were probably some people who really enjoyed it, but the fact that it was stream of consciousness, there was just so many pop culture references just thrown in everywhere that I think will probably age it pretty badly and just made it less enjoyable overall. I think there's a lot of things specifically in the first half that could have been edited down, and then because of the way the second half repeats the first half, you're going through a lot of the same stuff again. It's in a different context, yes, but I feel like you could have, like, the second part to me felt a lot more concise and better written, even though it was literally like half the book. But the first part, the pacing just felt so off. It felt like it dragged so much, and the characters like felt so shallow. There was nothing really for me to connect to. So I went through the whole book because I knew I wanted to do a book club on it, but if I hadn't been doing that, I probably would have DNF'd it because there was just nothing latching me onto the book, because, and I think some of it was specific, but I think the choice was not a great one. I think because so much of the book was trying to focus on getting to know people on a deeper level and not as shallow of a level, like, I think it was intentional that she tried to make the characters a little less in-depth in the first part, but the first part is what needs to grab you to keep you reading through to that second part and through to the end. So I was really having trouble because the pace was dragging. We were spending way too much time on details that really didn't seem to matter. The characters were just not well developed, and everything just kind of seemed so blah until we got to kind of the climax of the first part and into the second part. And again, I felt the second part was a lot better, but I think there were just some structural issues that really affected my enjoyment of the story overall. I think Christine definitely has the ability to be a really good writer. I think that there were just some sort of technical issues that may come with time, so maybe as she releases more books, these will be things that change as she matures as an author. So I would definitely be willing to read some of her future books, but this one specifically was just really hard for me to get through and enjoy. And I think part of that will come with just some better editing in the future maybe, but then again, also just like developing and maturing as an author. The next two are in my category of legitimate problems. So these were ones that had actual problematic elements that bothered me deeply. The first one is First Comes Love by Emily Giffin, and my main issue with this, so I mean there was a few other issues throughout it that I was just kind of like, that's your choice, really? My main issue with this was there was a therapist in there that was so bad, and I mean I'm in my PhD program for clinical psychology, so I tend to be very, I should say, hypervigilant about mental health, mental illness, and therapist representation in books and media in general. So I'm hyper aware when there's really bad therapists in books and media, and unfortunately it's a really common problem. Like, I think a lot of people just don't really understand what therapists are supposed to do and the ethics that come with it, and a lot of people kind of use therapists as a storytelling device to tell their characters what they should do or just to impart advice, but that's not the purpose of therapy. You're not supposed to tell people what they should do or give like very direct advice. There are some styles of therapy that are more direct than others, but this therapist just straight out like told the main character what she should and shouldn't do, and it caused a lot of problems and questioning in her marital relationship with her husband, and it really ticked me off. I was like steaming about it for the whole book, and I was like, all of this wouldn't have happened if her therapist wasn't crappy. And like, she even mentioned in the book that she liked her therapist's direct style. Like, she liked that she told her what to do, and I'm like, but that's what she shouldn't be doing. You should be helping your client to work through their problems on their own. They need to have agency in their own life. You don't want them to depend on you for their decisions in their life, like both for supporting them as an independent person, like they need to be able to have agency and independence in their own life, but then also for ethical reasons it protects the therapist. Because if you tell people what to do and then it goes terribly awry, they can come back and say, well, that therapist is terrible, they gave me bad advice. And yeah, you did. Like, it bothers me a lot. So I hate that literary device of just using therapists as a mouthpiece for what the author wants to do to get the story going. I think there's ways to use therapy in stories. There's ways to legitimately have it kind of kickstart a transformative experience for a character. But that was not the way to do it. It was not well done. Like, I don't know, maybe it was the intention to have her be a bad therapist, but that wasn't the way it was presented in the book. It was presented as, this is a good therapist, this is a helpful therapist, and this was what I needed to do to get my life back on track. I needed to have this happen. Like, the way it was presented was very positive, and I was very miffed. The next one I have is Bulletproof Mascara by Bethany. I have a whole book look on this, so if you want more detailed reasons why I did not like it, go there. But basically, this one had probably the most issues of any book I read this year. And this one was specifically because it just not a well-crafted story. There was problems with it, like openly supporting MLMs and that whole business model. There was some slurs used in the book. There was some transphobic moments. There was basically most problems that you can fit into a book were in this book. It was not good.
8 hours later.
So I do have an honorable mention, and that is going to be The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. So I debated back and forth whether I wanted to actually put this on the list, because there was a lot of things that, again, I really, really enjoyed about this book. I think as a thriller, as a mystery, it is extremely well done. My problem with it comes specifically in the mental health representation section. And again, this is why I debated and why I'm putting it in honorable mention, so it doesn't really belong on this list, because overall I enjoyed the book, but there were some specific issues with the mental health representation. And what I would worry about, normally you would have the villain have the psychotic disorder, but actually he did it interestingly where he actually had the main character as schizophreniform disorder, so she has a psychotic disorder. So that was actually really interesting. I thought that was a good flip on the genre, but some of the ways in which schizophreniform was represented weren't quite right and weren't accurate at all. Specifically when it came to sort of some of the symptomology, like it felt like it was almost there. Like if there had been a little bit more research done into how psychotic disorders actually tend to present, it would have been really, really, really good. But it just kind of fell short for me. And I did go into more detail in my book look on that, and actually there was a couple things I was sort of wrong about. So I did want to kind of address them here, which is another reason why I'm mentioning it in the video. So originally I kind of said that I wasn't sure about schizophreniform as the best diagnosis for her, specifically because she does have an episode come back later. Technically speaking, if you have another episode, then it changes to a schizophrenia diagnosis, which is very common for people with schizophreniform disorder. And I got some of that kind of confused in my book look. And it's definitely not my area of expertise. I'm still learning a lot about psychotic disorders. There's a lot in general that we have to learn about psychotic disorders, and schizophrenia is fairly rare. There's a lot we still don't know about it, and schizophreniform is even more rare than schizophrenia. So a lot of the information that we pull from schizophreniform comes from schizophrenia, because basically the differences between the two are the time period of the psychotic episode. But the presentation of the symptoms was not right in Last Time I Lied. Again, it was one of those things where it was used to move the story along. It was used to sort of show how the main character Emma was processing a lot of the trauma that happened to her at the camp that she was in. And when she was a child, and her psychotic episode was a direct result of this traumatic experience. But they did kind of throw in a mention like, oh, well, you already had a genetic predisposition to it, so I did like that. But then her episodes are only triggered by traumatic events, in which case it doesn't seem to fit with a lot of how the onset of psychotic disorders happen. A lot of them don't have a rapid, sudden onset due to a traumatic event. A lot of them gradually develop. And she really only seemed to have the symptoms of hallucinations. So she only hallucinated a specific person. She hallucinated Vivian, who's one of the girls who went missing in the book. And that was pretty much her only symptom. We didn't really see any evidence of other psychotic symptoms. Like, she theoretically must have had them because she got the schizophreniform diagnosis. But even when we see her active return to a hallucination, we don't see any other evidence of any other symptoms. And so that was kind of a problem for me, because I'm like, if you're gonna put in a specific diagnosis, I really want you to show me as an author that you've researched that you're not just using it as a plot device for your book, and that you are going to do your best to make it accurate. Like, I recognize that Riley Sager is an author, not a therapist or a psychiatrist. So I recognize that, you know, there's wiggle room for error, but I feel like mental illness representation, specifically when you put a name to it, like you say this character has schizophreniform disorder, it's important that you don't take creative liberties with the presentation of the illness, because it's already such a misunderstood illness. Like, it's already so misrepresented in media, and specifically within thrillers and, you know, that genre of stories. I feel like it's all the more important to have a very, very accurate representation of that specific illness. And so it bothered me that there were problems that even I, as like someone who doesn't specialize in that, like, even though clinical psychology is my field, I'm still learning a lot about psychotic disorders. It's not my specialty, and I'm very early in the program, so there's still a lot left for me to learn. But like, there were still glaring enough problems that I could pick up on them immediately, and it bothered me throughout a lot of the story. So I think as a whole, the story itself was really good. And I think he tried to do something to really subvert a lot of the harmful things in the genre, but it just missed the mark a little bit. And that really, which is really sad, because I think it was so close and it just wasn't quite there. So that's my honorable mention for the legitimate problems category. And then I have my last category, which is just DNF for now. So these are books that I tried this year and they just didn't really grab me right now, but I think they're good and I'll return to them later. So again, I only have one book in this category, and that's Murder at the Vicarage by Agatha Christie. I read a Miss Marple's mystery on my move and I really liked it, but I'm like, I'd really like to start at the beginning. So the first Miss Marple's mystery is Murder at the Vicarage, and it wasn't bad, but it just wasn't keeping me engaged in audio format. I may try again later in book format, but I think it just wasn't getting to the Miss Marple fast enough. I wasn't getting to the murder fast enough. I was just like, I was really kind of hoping to get into the mystery, and I was just doing so much setup and so much of really focusing on the vicar. Like, it was really from his point of view. Like, in Miss Marple at that point seemed really like a side character. So I never even, even got to the murder. I was just like, it's just kind of dragging for me. Okay. You know, so I think I may try it again later. I'm sure I would enjoy it once I got to the murder part, because I do like Agatha Christie's writing style. I like a lot of her stuff, but that one just wasn't grabbing me. So for now, it's a DNF. And yeah, those are my worst books of 2020. So I'm really curious if you have similar opinions, if you have very different opinions. I want to know what you think. So do you think I'm being too harsh on these books? Do you think I'm not being harsh enough? I would just love to see a dialogue down in the comments. I would love to see people discussing this, talking about what they think about the books. Specifically, if you have different opinions from me, I really want to know. Like, I really want to know what you think. So that's all I have for now. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. Stay magic, keep reading. I love you all so much. Goodbye!